All projects need to be implemented. That is why we need to know how to manage change in project management. And this is the focus of this part. We start here outlining the idea of change. We know that change is controversial. The reason is that human beings like stability and certainty. And change means uncertainty about what we will do, how we will do it, and when and why we will do things. That is why in this module we'll talk about people and events, because these are the two aspects that affect and are affected by change processes that are associated to projects. There are other reasons why change is controversial. After you read this slide, you will see that change is related to power and politics. Change affects power relations because during any change process, usually somebody will win something and somebody loses something. And this is related to, for example, access to resources, information, or promotion. So we need to understand what change is. One way to understand change is using the content, context, and process of change tool. Change is best understood as a complex interplay between the content, the process, and the context of change. This view recognizes that different groups that participate in the project may have different interests, different rationalities, goals, timing, agendas, and behavior, and all those aspects affects how the project is implemented. Then, the content of change refers to the formal part of the project, refers to the what of the project. What are the goals, the formal goals of the projects, and the formal aspects of the project in terms of resources, planning, and timing. The context of change is everything that is outside of the project and is given at the start of the project. We cannot change context. We can only influence context. We know that the context can be stable, it may not change much, or it may be more dynamic. It may change in significant extent. The key point here is that context shapes the process of change. The process of change, on the other hand, is actually how do we do things in the project. Is related to the decisions and actions developed, performed during the project in order to implement the project. The process of change can be, in simple terms, can be more planned or can be more emergent. However, there are many informal, intangible aspects during the process of change. I like this picture to explain the process of change. So we can imagine that in this picture, these people is going from point A to point B. Their plan is to go, let's say, tomorrow at 11 a.m. And the resources that they have is a car, they do have petrol, there is a road, and who will go are two ladies and one child. So this will be the content of change. There's a clear goal going from point A to point B by 11 a.m. using specific resources, and we know who will do what. That is the content of change. The context of change refers to aspects that we cannot change, right? For example, if related to weather conditions, we can see that there was rain probably the night before, and maybe the weather is unstable. It may be rain or may not be rain on that day. We can see that also that the road is a back road, And that means that there is no many people to help them if anything wrong happens. And also, there are no mobile phones, of course. There's no RSQ for helping with a mechanical problem in their car. And it looks like they're in a regional area, so there is very few people around. And that is the context of change. Are things that they cannot affect very much. There's nothing we can do about the context. The context is given in this case. And the process of change are all the decisions, actions that can be planned or unplanned that these people have done in order to try to achieve their goals. So, for example, they can decide to push the car. Another alternative is to say, okay, we are not going to point B because the car is broken and we will just wait here to see if somebody passes and we will have this help. So we don't need to go to point B today. But there are other things that they can do also, and they are emerging, they're unplanned. For example, they can push the car if they see that they are in a downhill position. They can push the car if there are not enough mud that can constrain the car. But also they can, for example, mm, they can they can use the cow. The cow is a neutral element so far, and as a neutral element, the cow can help or can constrain the project. If the cow decides to lay down in front of the car, it will constrain the project. But if the ladies use the cow to try to push to help to push the car, it will help the actual achievement of the goal of the project. So the key point is that the processes of change can be planned or unplanned, and there is a space to do many different things in order to achieve the goals of the project. But we need to consider that context aspects we cannot change. We cannot change the road, we cannot change the fact that it has been raining the whole night before the project, and that constrains the project. There are things that are given. But also the content of change, it maybe sometimes it can be changed. We can, as I mentioned to you at the beginning of the day, the plan was to go from point A to plan B, to go to the dentist, for example. But if the automobile breaks, as in this case, we can simply say, okay, we are canceling the appointment with the dentist, we are not going anymore to the dentist. Or we can say, okay, we go other day to the dentist. We can change the goal of the project in this specific case. The key point that I want you to see is that there is a relationship between the content of the project, the goals, the resources, the context of the project, and the processes of the project. The context of the project shapes the processes of the project. Here you can see some examples of the content of change. That is, the formal goal of the projects and the resources that there are available at the beginning of the project. Something that is important to notice regarding the content of change is that the goals of the project may change as the project unfolds. In this slide, you can see some examples of context of change. As you can see, as you can notice, these are external aspects of the project that we cannot control. We can influence some of them, yes, but we cannot control those aspects, such as, for example, government regulations. We cannot control, or market trends, or availability of some specific technology, material, or human resources. We cannot control because they are external to the project, but we can influence some of them. Process of change is one of the most important aspects in any complex projects. It refers to how do we do things, how do we implement plans. And the process of change can be in many cases planned in stable projects, in simple projects. In complex projects, probably it will be more emergent, will be more intangible, will be more informal aspects of the project. That is, it is not possible to plan in advance those processes because they refers to acknowledging or mapping what are the problems with the project team, for example, or what are the problems in the context of the project, understanding why are those problems, and how to create credibility on the project, for example, because credibility is a key process in any project. If people perceive actions of project managers as necessary and adequate, they will collaborate. Also, process of change may involve generating partial solutions or identifying opposition, identifying resistance. If we identify resistance, we can start to understand why people is resisting to some parts or elements of the project. We can also manage coalitions or map risks and change any perception of risk that constrain the development of the project. So we can say that change management is the art of influencing or shaping the course of first organizational actions, that is the process of change. Also influencing or shaping the content of change, that is the goals and the resources that we have available for the project. And finally, change is also about acknowledging that we cannot control all aspects of the context of the project. We can only influence them in order to push our project in a specific direction that will help to achieve the goals of the project. A change process is like launching a boat into a river with strong ribs. We, as project managers, can plan the launching of the boat. That is, we can plan when we will do it, where we will do it, what resources we will have in the boat, what technology we will have in the boat. We can even define how we will build the boat and the size and the weight and the materials. All that we can define that before the launching of the project or the launching of the boat in this case. However, after we launch the boat, there are many aspects that influence the performance of the boat and we cannot control. For example, weather conditions, reefs, customer demands, the price of petrol. As you can see, during the development of the project, there are many aspects that are emerging, that are unplanned, and project managers, they need to deal with them as they appear. Before the development of the project, yes, we can plan everything what it is possible. But as we know, it is not possible to plan what we do not know. And we will not know the weather conditions, the reefs and the customer demands and the price of petrol in advance. It is not possible to do this. That is why there's always elements of uncertainty of projects, and project managers need to have the tools in order to deal with those uncertainties. During our workshops and collaboration sessions, I will show to you this Jamie Oliver video in order to apply this concept of content, context, and process of change, and we will discuss it during those events. There are two questions that if we know how to answer these two questions, we will be able to implement a project easily. How do we control people and how do we control events? Well, we know that we cannot control people. However, there are a set of things that we can do in order to influence people's behavior or to cope with people's resistance to the project. The first thing that we can do in order to convince people to collaborate with the project is by giving hope to them. That is, by providing a picture of a brilliant future, we can convince people to collaborate to the project. And we can do this using two strategies, by education and communication and by participation and involvement. Education means informing people about the rationale of the project. We use education when resistance is due to a lack of information about the why and hows of the project. The problem that education is time consuming. Participation means active involvement in the development of the project. We use participation when resistance is a reaction to a sense of exclusion from the process of the project. Again, the project is the problem is that participation is a slow process. We need to convince people that participation will bring benefits to them and to the whole project. And this convincing is a time consuming aspect too. This slide details what I mean by education and communication and participation and involvement. Please read it on your own time. If education and participation do not work, we use negotiation. Negotiation means offering incentives to actual and potential resistors of the project. We use negotiation when resistors are in a strong position to undermine the project if their concerns are not addressed. The problem of negotiation is that a compromise or agreement with one specific group may de incentivize other groups, and this creates, of course, additional constraints to the development of the project. Other way managers use to convince people is by manipulation and co-optation. Manipulation, as we know, involves the selective use of information. However, we should use manipulation only when negotiation is too time consuming and there is no time to do this because otherwise the project may fail. Co-optation, on the other hand, involves providing a key resource or benefits to the people in order for them to accept to collaborate to the project. So any key resistors will become supporter of the project. And I have a very simple example of co-optation. Many years ago, I was in a project in which, in a assembly plant of small airplanes, and they had three assembly areas that they were organized by functional areas. And the point is that they said, okay, this is not very efficient, and we will change the layout and we will use a process view for the assembly area. That is, we will not have separate assembly areas by functional area. We will have assembly areas by process. Each production line will do a specific type of airplane or model of airplane. And in that time, there was a lot of resistance from the managers of the functional areas. So how they were able to convince to the managers of the functional areas, they simply said, okay, now you will be the new manager of the new process because there will be process 1, 2, and 3. And they accepted because their position was not challenged. They will be in the same hierarchical level, and it was a win-win solution for the project and for the area managers. Finally, when all the other ways to influence people do not work, we use fear. I mean, we use coercion, explicit coercion. Coercion means threatening people with negative consequences if they resist. We use coercion only when people has little capacity to resist to the project or when the organization is at risk if the whole project fails because everybody will be unemployed. So it's an extreme case in which we can use coercion. The use of those strategies to influence people needs a situational approach. That is, we need to select the method depending on the specific context, situation of the project. A very common mistake in in this case is that usually organizations and project managers use the first and second way of influencing people, that is education, participation, negotiation too, in all situations. But they will not work in all situations. They can work in most situations, and they are nice, good ways of doing things. But sometimes there's no time to do that. Or sometimes the situation is a crisis situation in which the whole project may fail, and failing the project may involve the bankrupts of the whole company. And in that case, extreme case, we need to use coercion or manipulation and cooptation. Another aspect that we need to consider is that the basis to use those strategies are different. In order to use education and participation and negotiation, project managers need trust, legitimacy, and reputation. But in order to use manipulation and cooptation and coercion, project managers need power and authority. Otherwise, it will not work. During the workshops and the collaborate session, we will develop this interacting exercise. I will show the video, and you will need to tell me what mechanisms Jamie used to overcome resistance to his project. If you have any questions regarding the model of change and how do we deal with resistance to change, please write down your questions so we can talk about that during the workshops and during the collaborate sessions.